January 1972, Memphis, Tennessee. Beale Street, 11 in the morning. A man is sitting on an overturned milk crate outside a closed pawn shop with a guitar case open in front of him, a few coins and a $1 bill scattered in the case, and he is playing. He is wearing a brown corduroy jacket with a frayed collar, a knit cap pulled low, and a pair of sunglasses despite the overcast January sky. His boots are worn through at the toe. He has not shaved in several days. To anyone walking past on Beale Street that morning, he is one of a particular kind of man that Memphis, like every city, has always had. A man with a guitar, in a need, in a sidewalk, playing for whatever the morning happens to produce. His name on this particular morning does not matter to the people walking past, because none of them recognize it. He is Elvis Presley, 37 years old, and this is the third time in 18 months that he has done this. Put on old clothes that Charlie Hodge keeps in a bag specifically for this purpose. Found a stretch of sidewalk in a part of Memphis where he is least likely to be recognized at this hour, and sat down to play guitar for whoever passes. The reasons he did this were never fully explained, not because they were secret, but because they were the kind of reasons that resist being explained without sounding either grander or smaller than they actually were. Charlie Hodge, who drove him and waited nearby on each occasion, said once that Elvis did it because he wanted, every so often, to know what it felt like to be heard for the music alone. Not the name, not the history, not the expectation that arrived in a room before he did, just the sound, offered to people who had no reason to listen to it, except that it was, in that moment, in front of them. He had been playing for about 20 minutes when the two women came around the corner. Their names were Deborah Aldridge and her sister, Vicki Aldridge. Deborah was 26, Vicki was 23, and they were in Memphis visiting their grandmother, who lived in a house on Mulberry Street and who had sent them out that morning to pick up a few things from the drugstore before lunch. They were from Jackson, Mississippi, and Memphis was to them a big city in the specific way that any city larger than the one you grew up in is a big city, full of things that were not in Jackson, full of a particular energy that both sisters found exciting in the way that visitors find things exciting before the things become ordinary through repetition. Deborah heard the guitar before she saw the man playing it. What she heard was a voice, not loud, not performing for an audience because there did not appear to be one, just a voice singing quietly to itself, the way people sing when they are alone with something, and the something happens to be coming out as sound. The song was "Love Me Tender." Deborah had heard the song many times in her life, on the radio, on records, at her grandmother's house where it had been played often enough that it had become part of the furniture of Sunday afternoons. She had never heard it sung like this, close, unamplified, a voice that filled the small space of the sidewalk the way it would have filled a much larger space if there had been a much larger space to fill. Except there wasn't, and the voice did not seem to know the difference, or did not care, or, and this was the thought that arrived in Deborah's mind before she fully understood why she was having it, was simply a voice that sounded like that no matter where it was. She slowed down. Vicki, beside her, slowed down too, following her sister's attention before she understood what it was attending to. They came around the corner of the building and saw the man on the milk crate outside the pawn shop. He did not look up. He was playing with his eyes mostly closed, the guitar held the way a man holds a guitar when he has been playing it since before he can remember holding anything else. And he continued through the second verse of the song without acknowledging that anyone had stopped to listen. Because in the previous 20 minutes, several people had walked past without stopping, and a few had stopped briefly and moved on. And stopping or not stopping was not, from where he sat, a thing that changed what he was doing. Deborah Aldridge stood on the sidewalk and listened. She said later that the first thing she registered, before the recognition, before anything else, was a kind of confusion. The confusion was not about who the man was. The confusion was about the gap between what she was seeing and what she was hearing. What she was seeing was a man on a milk crate in a frayed jacket, the kind of man you walk past in most cities without much thought, the kind of man whose presence on a sidewalk registered, if it registered at all, as a fact about the sidewalk rather than as a fact about the person. What she was hearing was a voice that did not belong to that man, or rather, and this was closer to the actual experience, she said later, a voice that belonged to that man completely, and that was, simultaneously, a voice she had heard 1,000 times on records, in the radio, and at her grandmother's house on Sunday afternoons. The two facts did not fit together. For a moment, they simply sat side by side in Deborah Aldridge's mind, unreconciled. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. Vicky, beside her, was having a similar experience, but arriving at it from a slightly different angle. Vicky was 23 and had grown up, like her sister, in a house where Elvis Presley's music was simply present, not a special occasion, just a constant, the soundtrack of ordinary days, which meant that Vicky's relationship to the voice was not the relationship of someone encountering something rare. It was the relationship of someone encountering something completely familiar in a place it had no business being, which is its own kind of strange, stranger in some ways than encountering something rare, because rarity prepares you for surprise and familiarity does not. She said very quietly to her sister, "That sounds just like..." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Deborah had already had the same thought and had already begun, in the specific way that minds work when they are trying to resolve an impossible gap, to look more closely at the man on the milk crate, not at the jacket or the cap or the sunglasses, which were doing exactly what they were designed to do, but past them, at the shape of the jaw, the line of the mouth as it formed the words, the particular way the hand moved on the guitar's neck, details that a glance would never register, but that a longer look, prompted by the impossible familiarity of the voice, began to assemble into something. The man on the milk crate reached the end of the verse, and in the brief instrumental turn before the next one, opened his eyes. He saw two young women standing on the sidewalk in front of him, both of them frozen, both of them with the specific expression of people who are in the process of having a thought they do not yet have words for. He did not stop playing. He moved into the next verse. Deborah said afterward that this was the moment everything resolved. Not because anything visible had changed, but because the man's eyes, meeting hers for that brief moment before he looked back down at the guitar, had done something that the jacket and the cap and the sunglasses could not undo. There was a quality in the look, not recognition exactly, because he did not know her, but a kind of acknowledgement, the specific acknowledgement of a performer who has noticed that someone is listening and is, in some small way, including them in what is happening. And that quality, Deborah said, was unmistakable in a way that had nothing to do with the face beneath the sunglasses and everything to do with something else, something that did not change no matter what a person was wearing. She put her hand to her mouth. Vicky, beside her, made a small sound. Not a word, just a sound. The sound a person makes when a thought arrives faster than the ability to articulate it. The man on the milk crate finished the song. He did not announce anything. He did not remove the sunglasses or the cap. He set the guitar down across his knees, and he looked up at the two young women standing on the sidewalk, and he said, in a voice that was quieter than the singing voice, but unmistakably the same voice, "Morning, ladies." Deborah said several years later when she told this story to her own children that what happened next was the part she had the hardest time describing, because what happened next was nothing. Nothing happened in the sense that nothing dramatic occurred. Nobody screamed, no crowd gathered. The moment did not turn into the kind of scene that these encounters are sometimes imagined to become. What happened was that Deborah Aldridge, 26 years old, standing on a sidewalk on Beale Street in Memphis on a January morning, looked at Elvis Presley sitting on a milk crate in a frayed jacket and sunglasses. And Elvis Presley looked back at her, and there was a moment, 3 or 4 seconds, in which both of them understood that she knew, and he knew that she knew, and neither of them said anything about it. Then Elvis said, "You ladies have a good morning," and he picked the guitar back up and he started another song. Deborah and Vicky stood there for another moment. Then Deborah reached into her coat pocket and found $1, the only bill she had, intended for whatever their grandmother had sent them to buy at the drugstore. And she walked forward and put it in the guitar case, among the coins in the single dollar that was already there. Elvis looked up at her as she did this. He said, "Thank you, ma'am." He said it the way he would have said it to anyone who put $1 in the case, which was, in its way, the most remarkable part of the entire morning. That having been seen, having had the disguise fail, in the specific and total way it had just failed, in front of 2 women from Jackson, Mississippi, he did not do anything different. He did not offer to give the $1 back, or trade it for something larger, or turn the moment into anything other than what it had been a moment before. A person putting money in a guitar case, and a musician thanking them for it. Deborah and Vicky walked on. They did not look back, not because they did not want to, but because looking back felt, to both of them, like it would have been a kind of intrusion, the breaking of something that had been offered, in its way, as a private moment despite happening in full view on a public sidewalk. They went to the drugstore. They bought what their grandmother had asked for, using change from Vicky's pocket, since Deborah no longer had her $1. They walked back to their grandmother's house on Mulberry Street, and they told her what had happened, and their grandmother, who had lived in Memphis her whole life and had her own complicated relationship with the idea of Elvis Presley, having grown up in a neighborhood not far from the one he grew up in years not far removed from the years he grew up in them, listened to the story and then sat quietly for a moment and said, "That sounds like him." She did not mean that it sounded like something Elvis Presley would do in the sense of celebrity behavior or publicity. She meant something more specific, something that the people of Memphis, who had known Elvis Presley before he was Elvis Presley, sometimes said about him in the years afterward. That there was a thread running through the person, from the boy on Beale Street in the late 40s, listening to the music coming out of the clubs he was too young to enter, to the man on the milk crate on Beale Street 25 years later, and that the thread was something like this: a wish, recurring and apparently permanent, to be where the music was without anything else attached to it. No stage, no name, no expectation arriving in the room before he did. Just the sidewalk and the guitar and whoever happened to walk by. When he walked by 25 years earlier, he had been the one listening. Now he was the one playing, and someone else was walking by. And for a few minutes on a January morning, the distance between those two positions, between the boy who listened and the man who was listened to, had collapsed into nothing, into a milk crate and a guitar case and $1 from a young woman who recognized a voice before she recognized a face. He played on Beale Street for another 40 minutes that morning. Charlie Hodge, waiting in a car around the corner, said that when Elvis finally got up and walked back to the car, he counted the money in the guitar case. $11.40 in coins and small bills, collected over an hour from people who mostly had no idea who they were giving it to. And he held it for a moment, and then he said, "That's a good morning's work." He did not mean the money. Charlie understood that. The money was $11.40, an amount that meant nothing to a man whose net worth was measured in numbers with many more digits. What he meant, Charlie said, was something closer to what Deborah Aldridge's grandmother had identified without ever hearing Elvis say it himself. That for 1 hour, on a milk crate outside a pawn shop on Beale Street, the music had been the whole of it, offered and received without anything else in the way. And that this was, for a man whose entire adult life had been conducted in rooms where the music was never the whole of it, where the name and the history and the expectation always arrived first, and the music had to find its way through everything that arrived with it. That this, the music alone, offered to whoever happened to walk by, was a kind of morning that did not come often, and that when it did come, It was worth more than $11.40, and worth more, in its way, than anything that happened on the stages where he spent most of his life. Deborah Aldridge kept the story for the rest of her life. She told it to her children. She told it the way her grandmother had said it. That sounds like him, because that was the part that mattered. More than the disguise, more than the recognition, more than the dollar. What mattered was that a man who could have been anything, anywhere, doing anything, had chosen, for one morning in January, to be a man on a milk crate outside a pawn shop on Beale Street, playing for whoever walked by, and that when he was seen for who he was, he did not become anything different. He said, "Thank you, ma'am," and he kept playing. That was the whole of it. That was, Deborah always said, the most Elvis thing about the entire morning. Not the voice, not the disguise, not even the moment of recognition. It was what happened after the recognition, which was nothing, because nothing needed to happen. The music had already been the whole of it. Everything else was just confirmation of something that had already been true for the entire 40 minutes before anyone knew who was playing. There is a particular kind of fame that, once it reaches a certain size, becomes a room of its own, a structure that a person carries with them, that arrives in every space before they do, that shapes how people look at them and speak to them in ways that have very little to do with who they actually are in that moment. Elvis Presley had lived inside that structure for nearly 2 decades by January of 1972, and the structure was, by every account of the people close to him, both a source of everything he had and a kind of weight that did not lift, not even at home, because the structure did not require an audience to exist. It went where he went, the way weather goes where the sky is. What the milk crate on Beale Street offered, for an hour, was a sidewalk without that structure on it. Not because anyone had removed it, but because for that hour, almost nobody on that sidewalk knew it was there. The frayed jacket and the knit cap and the sunglasses made the fame invisible to the people walking past, which produced for the man wearing them something close to the same effect. An hour in which the voice arrived at people without anything else arriving first. Deborah Aldridge had that experience too, from the other side. She heard a voice on a sidewalk, and for a few seconds, before recognition arrived, she simply heard it. A beautiful voice, singing a song she knew, coming from a man on a milk crate. Those few seconds were seconds in which Deborah Aldridge experienced something that almost nobody who has ever heard of Elvis Presley gets to experience. Hearing that voice for the first time, with no idea whose it was. Charlie Hodge drove him home. The frayed jacket went back in the bag. The $11.40 went into a drawer at Graceland, where similar amounts from similar mornings had gone before and would go again. Nothing about the rest of that day was different in any way anyone could point to, except that for 1 hour, on one morning, on one sidewalk, it had been different. And the difference did not need to last beyond the hour to have been real. Some things are like that, complete in themselves, finished within their own boundaries, not requiring continuation to have mattered. The milk crate is gone. The pawn shop closed years ago. Beale Street has changed the way streets change. But Deborah Aldridge told the story to her children, the way these things travel, not through any record, but through the people who were there, carrying forward the thing that happened on a sidewalk in Memphis when a man wanted, for an hour, to be heard for the music alone, and was, by 2 sisters from Jackson, Mississippi, who recognized a voice before they recognized a face, and left $1 in the case and walked on. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who understands what it means to want, every so often, to be seen for the thing itself and not for everything that comes attached to it. Subscribe for more stories about who these people were in the moments nobody planned to remember. And tell us in the comments, have you ever heard something extraordinary coming from somewhere you did not expect it? The voice before the face. Those moments are worth telling. Leave yours below.